Tuesday of the 5th week in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the book of Genesis. God said, "Let the water teem with an abundance of living creatures, and on the earth let birds fly beneath the dome of the sky." And so it happened. God created the great sea monsters and all kinds of swimming creatures with which the water teems, and all kinds of winged birds. God saw how good it was, and God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile, multiply, and fill the water of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." Evening came, and morning followed, the 5th day. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth all kinds of living creatures, cattle, creeping things, and wild animals of all kinds." And so it happened. God made all kinds of wild animals, all kinds of cattle, and all kinds of creeping things of the earth. God saw how good it was. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and the cattle, and over all the wild animals, and all the creatures that crawl on the ground." God created man in his image. In the divine image he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things that move on the earth." God also said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant all over the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit on it to be your food, and to all the animals of the land, all the birds of the air, and all the living creatures that crawl on the ground, I give all the green plants for food." And so it happened. God looked at everything he had made, and he found it very good. Evening came, and morning followed, the 6th day. Thus the heavens and the earth and all their array were completed. Since on the 7th day God was finished with the work he had been doing, he rested on the 7th day from all the work he had undertaken. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work he had done in creation. Such is the story of the heavens and the earth at their creation. The word of the Lord.
Responsorial Psalm. The response is, "O Lord our God, how wonderful your name in all the earth. When I behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you set in place, what is man that you should be mindful of him, or the son of man that you should care for him? O Lord our God, how wonderful your name in all the earth. You have made him little less than the angels, and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him rule over the works of your hands, putting all things under his feet. O Lord our God, how wonderful your name in all the earth. All sheep and oxen, yes, and the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fishes of the sea, and whatever swims the paths of the seas. O Lord our God, how wonderful your name in all the earth."
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. When the Pharisees, with some scribes who had come from Jerusalem, gathered around Jesus, they observed that some of his disciples ate their meals with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. For the Pharisees, and in fact all Jews, do not eat without carefully washing their hands, keeping the tradition of the elders. And on coming from the marketplace, they do not eat without purifying themselves. And there are many other things that they have traditionally observed: the purification of cups and jugs and kettles and beds. So the Pharisees and scribes questioned him, Why do your disciples not follow the tradition of the elders, but instead eat a meal with unclean hands?" He responded, "Well did Isaiah prophesy about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines human precepts.' You disregard God's commandment, but cling to human tradition." He went on to say, "How well you have set aside the commandment of God in order to uphold your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and your mother, and whoever curses father or mother shall die.' Yet you say, 'If someone says to father or mother, any support you might have had from me is korban,' meaning dedicated to God, you allow him to do nothing more for his father or mother. You nullify the word of God in favor of your tradition that you have handed on. And you do many such things." The Gospel of the Lord.
February 7th, Tuesday of the 5th week in Ordinary Time. The first reading comes from Genesis 1:20 to 2:4a. This is the second half of the priestly account of creation. We call it the priestly account because it was probably written by a group of priests who were writing during the Babylonian exile. And one of their purposes is to show that God created everything in a week, in 7 days, to combat the idea that is used among the Babylonians that the week really lasts 15 days. It was very important that the priests show that the Jewish customs were not simply things created by humans, but rather were sanctioned by God himself. We hear that God creates all the creatures in the sea. Remember, the Jewish people didn't consider the sea to be a very positive thing, yet God has authority even over these sea creatures, which were considered to be dangerous. Rahab, Leviathan, creatures of chaos. God created them. God creates birds, which are at the edge of our world, and yet God created everything, even the wild beasts. His greatest of creation, though, is human beings. We hear God say, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." And so God created man in his image. In the divine image he created him. Male and female he created him. We are created in God's image and likeness. These are words that would often be used for pagan idols, something that would represent the authority of the gods. In this case, we are created in God's image and likeness. In fact, there's a Jewish saying that in front of every human being flies a host of archangels who proclaim, "Fall on your knees before the image of the living God." What does it mean to be in the image of God? It's not really clear. In later medieval times, the philosophers would say that it was that we were spiritual creatures. But it doesn't seem to imply that, because we're physical, we're incarnate. Rather, immediately after God creates human beings, he gives them dominion over all of creation. So in a sense, we're God's viceroys upon the earth. We represent God's authority here on earth over every living creature. Notice that everything was created for us, for our goodness, for our sustenance. That's the exact opposite of what most pagan myths would say, that humans were created as slaves to serve the gods. Here, God creates us to be his companion, to be his viceroy upon the earth. And he creates us. Remember, the word create is something used only for God. In this case, though, God created us. In his image he created us. Male and female he created us. The word create is used 3 times. The triple use is significant because in Hebrew there's no comparative or superlative degree. To say bigger, you have to say big, big. To say biggest, you say big, big, big. By using create 3 times, we are the createdest, that we are what God really intended when creation began. And then on the 7th day, God rests. The Sabbath rest was something created by God. And Jewish people believed that when they rested on the Sabbath, they were doing a truly divine thing, that they were most like God when they rested. The Gospel is from Mark 7, 1 to 13. We hear that the Pharisees and the scribes object to the fact that Jesus' disciples and Jesus don't wash their hands before they eat. Now, technically, the law doesn't say you have to wash your hands. It says you have to wash your hands before you pray in the temple, not before you eat. But the Pharisees would extend the interpretation of the law to its widest possible extent. What is Jesus' response to their scrupulosity? He says that they purify the outside of objects, but they don't purify the inside. That they're hypocrites. They honor the Lord with their lips, but their actions are inconsistent. And he gives some examples. That you say that you should honor your father and mother, but then the sustenance you intended to give them, you can dedicate to the temple as the tenth that you were supposed to give, and say, gee, I would have helped my parents, but I can't because it belongs to the temple. And he sees that as hypocrisy. Now realize, there's a lot of good things that we could say about the Pharisees, but the Gospels are very, very tough on the Pharisees, because their observance of the law was seen not as a way of trying to preserve a special gift from God, because the Jewish people saw the law as a gift, but rather as an imprisonment, as a burden that went beyond what God intended. That God truly intends us to live a life of charity, a life of transforming ourselves so that we're purified not only externally, but also in our hearts. And may God bless us.